The 9 o'clock news now on BBC One with Peter Sissons.
The two boys convicted of killing the toddler James Bulger are to have their case referred to the Court of Human Rights. Lawyers for John Venables and Robert Thompson claim their trial was degrading and inhuman. Facing ruin, the Grimsby businesses which must pay thousands of pounds more for their water supply. And Yehudi Menuhin, whose musical genius enriched much of the century, is dead. Good evening. The murder of little James Bulger was a case that shocked the nation, but 6 years later, the way our justice system treated his 10-year-old killers is to be scrutinised by the European Court of Human Rights. John Venables and Robert Thompson are now 16 and are being detained indefinitely for their crime. Their lawyers will argue before the Human Rights Court that that itself is wrong. And they'll also be questioning the trial of the two young murderers, arguing that because it was held in an adult court, it was inhuman and degrading.
There was raw emotion on Merseyside when the two boys who murdered James Bulger made their first court appearance 6 years ago. People found it hard to comprehend how two children could take a toddler away from his mother and batter him to death. The boys left James Bulger's body on a railway line in an attempt to conceal the murder. Robert Thompson was just 10 and a half at the time of the killing. His co-defendant, John Venables, was the same age. The boys are now 16. But because the charges were so serious, the two boys were tried by a judge and jury sitting in public. Instead of being tried in a youth court, they were treated in the same way as adults. Their lawyers claimed that the hearing was a breach of their right to a fair trial because they were too young to understand what was going on and they couldn't take part in the proceedings. After they'd been convicted, the two boys were sent to secure local authority accommodation. The lawyers also complained about the way their minimum period of punishment was fixed by the Home Secretary. They said it should have been decided by a court rather than by a politician.
It's completely wrong that a politician, rather than a judge, should set the minimum sentence in a case like this. It's bound to create a risk that a politician will set a sentence with an eye to electoral popularity or media headlines rather than the merits of the case, and that's not a system of justice.
The boys' lawyers put these arguments to the Human Rights Commission in Strasbourg last year. The commissioners won't announce their opinion until Monday, but there are strong indications that they will support some of the boys' arguments. Tonight, a solicitor representing James Bulger's father said further hearings reopened painful family memories.
If they do come down on the basis that human rights have been violated and they have to be remedied, then there'll be a huge outcry here, equivalent to the hysteria that accompanied the original trial and the events leading up to the original trial. And then the knife will be turned further in the wound of the parents of the boy who got murdered.
James Bulger's mother said she thought the two boys should never be freed, although she reluctantly accepted that they might be considered for parole after 15 years. The Home Office said it deplored the fact that today's news had emerged before the Bulger family could be notified. This case will now go to the European Court of Human Rights, but there's no guarantee that the court will agree with the Commission. Even if the court were to rule that the boys had not received a fair trial, they would not have to be released from custody. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News.
The violinist Yehudi Menuhin, one of the finest musicians of the 20th century, has died at the age of 82. Lord Menuhin was a child prodigy whose promise was magnificently fulfilled during a lifetime as violinist, conductor, teacher and musical campaigner. He was in Berlin to conduct a concert when he fell ill.
Menuhin's 80th birthday was celebrated in typically grand style with a concert at the Royal Albert Hall, a fitting tribute to a man whose professional career spanned 7 decades. He was born in New York of Russian Jewish parents and proved an astounding musical prodigy. He made his debut at the age of 7. Albert Einstein later heard him and remarked, "Now I know there's a God in heaven." Another admirer was that most English of composers, Sir Edward Elgar. In 1932, Elgar conducted his violin concerto in a classic recording of the 16-year-old Menuhin. Soon he'd become a campaigner for human values as well.
He never was just a musician. He, from very early on, wanted to do other things, to make his music work for humanity. For example, just after the war had ended, he'd heard about Belsen in the concentration camps. With Benjamin Britten, he went to Belsen and played not only for the survivors of the camps, but also for the Germans. He wanted to show the Germans what the Jewish people were capable of.
The 1950s saw him at the height of his powers. One of the foremost violinists of his age, he delighted audiences around the world with his smoothness of tone and the sheer physicality of his performance, as here in his favourite work, Beethoven's Violin Concerto.
The concerto appealed to my search for reverence, for serenity, for finding the ultimate union, if you wish, that inner peace. And I think people have always said that my interpretation of the slow movement had a particular quality.
He wasn't afraid to experiment, famously playing duets with the jazz violinist Stefan Grappelli. Besides music, his great love was education. He founded the Yehudi Menuhin School for gifted young musicians. Today, they observed a minute's silence in his honor. Nigel Kennedy, seen here at the age of 13, is one of the school's most famous products.
You want this to be a sort of inspiration when possibly we're having the theoretical aspects of music ground into a little bit too much, then he'd appear like a ray of gold light and give us a bit of encouragement in a more charismatic way.
In later years, he performed less often as a soloist, more as a conductor. He'll be remembered as a man of great spirituality and great humanity, and for his recordings, which enabled millions to share in the brilliance of his playing.
Yehudi Menuhin, who died today. And on Sunday night at 11:20, BBC Two will show in tribute Yehudi Menuhin's 80th birthday concert at the Royal Albert Hall. The German Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder, has appointed a new finance minister. Hans Eichel replaces the left-winger Oscar Lafontaine, who resigned unexpectedly yesterday. The new minister is seen as a moderate who's expected to get on better with German business and with his counterparts in the rest of Europe.
The strain of the past few days has begun to tell on Gerhard Schröder as he faced the waiting media in Bonn. He said he'd be standing as SPD party chairman, a post left vacant by Oscar Lafontaine.
Über Motive zu spekulieren, weil sie mir nicht genannt
The
hat.
German Chancellor refused to speculate on Mr. Lafontaine's motives for his resignation, saying only his former finance minister could explain. Cast out into the political wilderness, Mr. Lafontaine was keeping a low profile at his home on the border to France, leaving the talking to his former cabinet allies.
The leadership of the Social Democratic Party has done what it had to do. Well, we have used our responsibilities, we have filled the gap, and we will do what our electors and what the membership of the Social Democratic Party and the German people awaits from us.
The man who'll fill that gap is Hans Eichel, a former regional premier of Germany's richest state of Hesse. He's seen as a safe pair of hands, a man after the Chancellor's own pragmatic heart. Mr. Eichel is expected to take a more conciliatory stance on Europe and woo back those alienated by Oscar Lafontaine. Today, though, he was saying little. He won't take office for another 3 weeks.
What are your priorities?
Ask me after the 7th of April.
But are you happy?
Oh, yes, sir.
Within the German cabinet, Mr. Schröder's centrist allies are now on the rise, after a distinctly bumpy start. But Mr. Lafontaine's socialist ideals will be sorely missed by some, not least among the Greens.
It will not be easier. It will not be easier for us, but I think that is also clear for the Chancellor and for the Social Democrats. We only can be successful together.
Today, the German Chancellor made clear he's now in sole command, with a like-minded finance minister soon to be at his side. This coalition is a fragile one, and a stormy EU summit lies ahead. Over the coming weeks, Mr. Schröder will need all his political skills to keep this government on track. Caroline Wyatt, BBC News, Bonn.
Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic have been formally admitted as members of NATO. A ceremony was held in the United States to mark the occasion, the first time that former communist nations have joined the 16-member alliance. The countries also held their own celebrations at home. There was a flag-raising ceremony in the Polish capital, Warsaw. The fishing industry at one of Britain's major ports says it could be put out of business by a massive rise in water charges. Grimsby in Lincolnshire is counting the cost of new European rules designed to clean up wastewater. Other industries along the coast could soon face similar problems. Our business correspondent Greg Wood reports.
Dawn at Grimsby Fish Market.
£8.20, £8 a stone.
They've been selling fish here for centuries, but now the market's threatened with closure because all its merchants face a huge rise in their water charges. Nancy Welburn and her husband Mike run a small filleting business. They've had a letter from Anglian Water. The bill is going up from £1,700 a year to £63,000.
If we are forced into paying this, these kind of bills, then we will have to close.
As simple as that?
Yeah.
We're losing a lot of sleep on a night. I mean, it's not only myself. I've got my whole family working for us here, and it's my full family that'll suffer.
This new sewage treatment plant just down the road is the cause of the problem. Anglian built it to comply with strict European rules on cleaning up rivers and beaches. The waste treated here is mainly fish waste, so it's the fish merchants of Grimsby who have to foot the bill.
Well, it's important that everybody pays their fair share according to the amount they use the service or pollute. And the way the charging system works is that the polluter pays. The more you pollute, the more you pay.
Here in Grimsby, hundreds of businesses and thousands of jobs are at risk. And what's more, this pattern will be repeated around the country as coastal industries face a massive rise in their water bills. At first, Grimsby will lose business to other ports where water charges are lower. But soon they too will be affected, as treatment plants like the one here are built all round the UK to comply with European rules. Britain's fishing industry is already but a pale reflection of its former self. The danger is that rules on clean water, though widely welcomed, could make it disappear for good. Greg Wood, BBC News, Grimsby.
The Scottish National Party is urging voters to reject the penny cut in the basic rate of income tax, which was announced in this week's budget. Its leader, Alex Salmond, speaking at the party's conference in Aberdeen, said the SNP would spend the extra money on housing, education and health if it won control of the Scottish Parliament in May's elections.
The nationalist tax move has brought the Scottish election contest to life. SNP activists at a rally tonight believe they can outwit Labour by promising Scotland money for education, health and housing. Earlier, their leader Alex Salmond said they'd use the new Scottish Parliament's limited taxation powers to reverse the Chancellor's promise of a penny off the standard rate next year.
Gordon Brown thinks that the Scottish election can be bought by £2 a week for the average Scot, bought and sold for a penny off tax. I think he's wrong. I know he's wrong.
Privately, party strategists are happier to fight this election on tax and spending rather than their longer-term aim of independence. But that wasn't forgotten.
An SNP government will hold in its first 4-year term a referendum on Scottish independence.
That could rule out a Scottish pact with the Liberal Democrats, although the two parties are now closely aligned on tax. To close, a patriotic note to reassure those who fear the leadership has diluted the party's passion.
We are ready to win. We are ready for Scotland to succeed in winning equality and independence for our country, to be a nation again.
Warm applause from the delegates, who now believe they have a distinctive line to sell. And away from the conference on the streets of Aberdeen, some initial support.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with him, actually. I think for all the difference that 1 pence is going to make, it would be better put to health.
I'd spend it in health and education. I pay enough tax as it is, so a tax cut would be more beneficial to me.
And past experience suggests that may be how voters think in the polling booth. Back at the conference, a few delegates are uneasy. They know both Labour and the Tories have ruled out using the Scottish tax power and will hit the SNP hard. But the new policy will be comfortably endorsed in a conference vote tomorrow. All parties promise to improve public services, and the Scottish elections will be no different in that regard. But confronting the voters with the direct cost of that exercise is hugely risky. Political folk memory says it doesn't work, but the nationalists insist they can break the mould. Ryan Taylor, BBC News, at the SNP conference in Aberdeen.
Newport councillors decided to take no action against the hotel which served beef on the bone to Prince Charles. The meat was served to the Prince and the Welsh Secretary Alan Michael at an event promoting Welsh beef, despite government regulations banning the selling or serving of beef on the bone. The council said a prosecution would not be in the public interest. A London shopkeeper has won a legal battle against Elvis Presley's estate to use the singer's name on souvenirs. With an Elvis impersonator at his side, Sid Shaw said the case had been a David and Goliath battle. The Court of Appeal ruled that the singer's estate did not have sole rights to Elvis's name. The dispute over bananas, which could set off a trade war between Europe and the United States, has already begun to damage the economies of the Caribbean islands, which rely on selling the fruit for survival. Governments in the Caribbean are angry at America's efforts to make the World Trade Organization revoke their preferential trading arrangements with Europe. George Alagaya has been to the East Caribbean islands of St Vincent and the Grenadines, whose prosperity depends on being able to sell bananas to Europe.
It doesn't seem right somehow, does it? All this talk about a trade war, retaliation, a transatlantic rift, all that about bananas. The question is, should we care about who produces our bananas, as long as they end up in our fruit bowls? Well, here on the tiny island of St Vincent, the farmers have an answer to that question, and it's worth listening to.
St Vincent is roughly the size of the Isle of Wight, one of a string of eastern Caribbean islands that depend on the banana trade for their livelihood. There are about 3,500 banana farmers here, and they work on small, family-run plots of about 2 or 3 acres. The money they earn, typically about £80 each for a good week, represents well over half the island's exports. Without it, men like Fitzroy Brown and Dennis John would struggle, dragging the economy down with them.
We will be suffering in this country, and we almost begging our bread because we living by these bananas.
But that's the whole point about trade. If you compete, somebody's got to lose, and you're losing. How does that make you feel to be the loser?
Well, sad to be a loser.
Officially, the unemployment rate is already 1 in 3, but even a casual look tells you that that figure, high as it is probably an underestimate. St Vincent's government, most of it fits into this marquee, knows that the country has got to diversify, but one thing it won't do is replace the family-owned industry with the plantation system that American multinationals run in Central America. That would be a throwback to these islands' bleak history.
And we are talking about a war between 25,000 farmers in a property-owning democracy in the Caribbean and one plantation owner, and 19th century slavery in Latin America.
No one's pretending there's an easy answer to any of this, but one way of looking at the problem is as a choice between free trade on the one hand and fair trade. In other words, a choice between the multinationals' right to sell as many bananas as they want into Europe against the desire of the small-scale farmers here to protect their livelihood.
This boat should arrive in Southampton the week after next. It's loaded with bananas fit for the exacting standards of our supermarkets. But it also carries another invisible cargo, hope for the future. George Alagaya, BBC News, St Vincent and the Grenadines.
Here, 3 men have now been charged in connection with the death of the musician Michael Menson, who was found on a London street with serious burns 2 years ago. Two have been charged with murder. One of the men, Mario Pereira, appeared in court this morning. Police now admit to serious mistakes in at first treating Mr. Menson's death as suicide.
For the family of Michael Menson, this has been a significant day. Two men have been charged with Michael's murder. Both, along with a third, have also been accused of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. And for the first time, the Menson family have come face to face with one of the suspects in court this morning. The family have criticised the initial investigation by the Metropolitan Force, still reeling in the aftermath of Lawrence. The family claim the attack on the 30-year-old was racially motivated. They also believe that because Michael was black, the police failed to treat his case seriously. It's 2 years since Michael Menson was found here in North London wandering along these roads. He was half naked and on fire. He died 2 weeks later in hospital, but had told several people that he'd been attacked by a gang of white youths. Despite that, police failed to interview him. They thought because he had a history of mental illness that he'd tried to kill himself. The police later apologised to the Menson family, admitting serious errors. And Detective Chief Superintendent Michael Parks, seen at court today, has led a fresh inquiry from the new Racial and Violent Crimes Task Force. Today, the first of the three suspects to be charged, 25-year-old Mario Pereira, was driven to Enfield magistrates. Unemployed and living in Edmonton, he was accused of the murder of Michael Menson and of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He was remanded in custody till next week.
This has been another very stressful and distressing day for the family. They've campaigned long and hard for the truth about Michael to come out. But they're not complacent. There's a continuing police investigation.
The Menson family has asked the Police Complaints Authority to look at this case. Meanwhile, tomorrow, the two further suspects will be charged in court. 50-year-old Hussein Abdullah with conspiracy and 26-year-old Karalanbus Constantino with both conspiracy and murder. Geeta Gurumurthy, BBC News, Enfield Magistrates Court.
The Albanian community in the United States has openly raised millions of dollars to buy guns for the Kosovo Liberation Army. The Albanians want to see an independent Kosovo, free from control by the Serbs. At the same time, the American government is putting pressure on the KLA to end the fighting. A second round of peace talks starts on Monday in Paris.
The tune is American, but the words are Albanian. While Washington has been pressing the Kosovo Albanians to accept peace, Albanian Americans have been working flat out to raise money, to buy arms, to continue the fight for independence.
We have gathered here today to commemorate and honor the thousands of our brothers and sisters who have...
At rallies like this one in the New York suburb of Yonkers, the Kosovo Liberation Army have raised tens of millions of dollars, and the support is growing all the time. They say whatever happens at the peace talks, they'll continue collecting money for weapons.
This is only the beginning for the Albanian community out of Kosovo. This is just going to spread out even more, and it will continue until the end, until we have a sovereign and independent Kosovo.
Despite a UN arms embargo, this is quite legal in the United States, but they certainly didn't want us to see money changing hands. These sort of gatherings are giving a momentum to the Kosovo Liberation Army that's very hard to stop. They're building out a network for fundraising and for political support. And the very clear message from here is that whatever happens in the peace talks, they're not going to stop their fight short of full independence. More than 200,000 Albanians live in the New York area. But the Gura Cafe Uksaliai is one among the exiles. 7 members of his family were killed in Kosovo last year. He told us he sent 3/4 of his income back to Kosovo, half of that to the KLA. He said he left himself the bare minimum to live on. Many of the weapons his donations are helping to pay for get seized by the Serbs. The arms that do reach the KLA are not changing the military balance. They are giving the Kosovo Albanians the self-confidence to play tough in the peace talks. Despite talk of pressing both sides to make peace, the Americans have made no attempt to curtail this fundraising. Activists here believe they even have the tacit approval of Washington. And this was one of 3 money-raising functions in the same area on the same day. John Lyne, BBC News, Yonkers, New York.
Friends and fans of the singer Dusty Springfield attended her funeral this afternoon in Oxfordshire. She died last week after a long battle with breast cancer. Generations of pop stars gather at the church in Henley-on-Thames, where they paid tribute to the influence she had on their own singing careers. Tomorrow, Lennox Lewis steps into the boxing ring in New York for the biggest fight of his life. If he beats Evander Holyfield at Madison Square Garden, he'll become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world.
Lennox Lewis weighs in at 246 pounds, 246.
It's being modestly billed as the last great fight of the century between the two best heavyweights on the planet. But behind the pre-bout hype, there's little doubting the significance of this fight to both Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield. Such is the scale of interest that it's become the fastest sellout ever at Madison Square Garden, with a capacity crowd of 20,000. Warming up in front of the world's media, Lewis believes he has the power and the stamina to make the difference.
I will win because I'm superior. I feel I'm superior. I'm gonna prove that.
What ways?
In every way. I'm gonna outthink him, outbox him, outpunch him.
Holyfield, with 2 victories over Mike Tyson to his name, remains the favourite to pick up another heavyweight title. He's promised a knockout in the 3rd round and is unconcerned about Lewis's abilities.
I don't assess it. You know, I just look at that's Lennox Lewis, and he's a champion too, and he coming in here to win. And my whole thing is not to think about what he do, but to think about what I need to do and do it.
Tonight, the first of the expected 7,000 British fans have been making their presence felt in New York. Some have paid up to $1,500 for tickets, and they're fiercely loyal to Lewis. If Lennox Lewis wins here tomorrow night, he'll become the first British undisputed heavyweight champion for more than a century. Whatever happens, he'll be $12 million richer. Paul Newman, BBC News, Madison Square Garden in New York.
And the main news tonight, the 2 boys convicted 6 years ago of killing the toddler James Bulger are to have their case referred to the European Court of Human Rights. And the violinist Yehudi Menuhin has died. He was 82. The next BBC News is at 10 o'clock on News 24. That's for those of you with cable or digital. And on Newsnight at 10:35 on BBC 2. That's all from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
Hello, good evening and welcome to Look North. A man from Sheffield is beginning a life sentence tonight after murdering his common-law wife and encasing her head in concrete. It's emerged that Kenneth Peatfield had previously been jailed for plotting to murder his first wife and their 10-year-old daughter.
The house of horror in Sheffield, where police believe Kenneth Peatfield hacked his partner Susan Craven to death a year ago, leaving her severed head encased in a block of concrete in the garage. Peatfield denied Mrs. Craven's killing, but following his conviction today, it was revealed that the pipe engineer from Lancashire had previously served a 10-year sentence for plotting to have his first wife and daughter killed in Oldham to get his hands on insurance money. After release from jail and living a new life in Sheffield, it's believed Peatfield committed murder himself because he wanted his teenage lover Faith Warner, an innocent pawn in the plot, to move in to replace Susan Craven in his life.
I think Peatfield is one of those people who is truly evil and will stoop to any lengths to fulfill his ambitions.
Now Kenneth Peatfield is beginning a life sentence.
The first miners' strike for 15 years is to go ahead on Monday after last-minute crisis talks failed. 3,000 miners in the region will take part in the strike caused by a pay dispute with RJB Mining. 1 person died and 5 others were injured in a crash on the A59 near Knaresborough today. 2 cars and a van were involved in the accident at 7 a.m. near the Goldsborough roundabout. Extra police are being brought in to flood-hit parts of North Yorkshire because of fears empty homes will fall prey to thieves. 2 people have already been arrested in one of Malton's flooded streets after an attempted break-in. A man's appeared in court in Barnsley charged with murdering his mother. 60-year-old Mary Whelan was found strangled at her home in Hoyland last Sunday. Michael Armes was remanded in custody for a week by magistrates. Police in North Yorkshire are hunting arsonists who set fire to the home of a couple in their 80s. An ignited firelighter was pushed through the letterbox of their home in Constable Burton near Leyburn. The couple put out the fire and were unhurt. Protesters are celebrating tonight after plans to burn BSE-infected cattle waste at an incinerator in Lincolnshire were thrown out. The proposals from Fibrogen were turned down by councillors at a meeting this afternoon. Residents had protested against the proposals to create the biggest incinerator of its kind at Flixborough. The company is now considering an appeal. Finally, somebody somewhere out there is a millionaire, but they don't know it yet. A lottery ticket worth more than £1 million is lying unclaimed. The lucky winner is from Hull. So just in case you might be the lucky person, here are the numbers. They are 7, 19, 32, 37, 40 and 44. Go and check your tickets. That's it from us. Comic Relief continues in a moment. Hello to all those I met at Brotherton earlier today. Well done to you. From all of us here, good night.
Hello there, good evening. Well, I hope you've been enjoying your fundraising today. In fact, the warmest day in London so far this year at 16 Celsius, that's 61 Fahrenheit. You really did feel a change in the south. And we inherited that warmth from the continent, but unfortunately not just the warmth. We've also seen some rather disturbed weather coming up from France. A real arc of cloud now pushing in across southern parts of Britain, not just wet weather, but also some rumbles of thunder. But let's look at the radar then. You can see how things have deteriorated through the afternoon. We've had that rain gradually pushing in, bright colours on the radar, some locally very heavy rain, some quite nasty conditions on the roads. And it's not just rain, there's also that thundery activity as well. And you can zoom in on the radar, seeing that rain now pushing in towards Stevenage and London and up in towards the Midlands. So there will be some heavy rain around then, some quite tricky conditions on the roads for a time, but I think by the end of the night, the worst of that wet weather will have pushed out into the North Sea, and then we'll be left with just spots of rain, I think, but a lot of cloud, mist and fog. Now, still some showers up to the northwest of Britain, but I think some good breaks developing across much of Northern Ireland, central and eastern Scotland. Here's some of the lowest temperatures at about 0 or 1 degree, so some patches of frost there, but I think really for much of England and Wales, we are looking at quite a mild night, no lower than around 7 Celsius across East Anglia and the southeast. So to start with tomorrow then, we keep all that mild, rather murky weather for much of the morning. Still a little bit of rain around as well. But I think as we go into the afternoon, we'll see some brighter skies getting down in towards the southeast. And I think for many areas in the afternoon, there will be some sunshine around. In fact, quite pleasant across southern and eastern parts of Scotland compared to today. But there will be showers to the northwest, some showers into Northern Ireland as well, and maybe to the west of the Pennines. And temperature-wise, about 9 or 10 in the north. Not quite as high as today, but still 12 to the Midlands and the southeast. And then for Sunday, well, we keep high pressure across southern parts of Britain, so not bad, some quiet weather, some mist and fog, but showers for the northwest. Now, I hope you have a very good evening. I'll just leave you with this red nose speak.